Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Van Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Uh-huh. So come get some. CromCon.
Hey, we want to shout out to our sponsors, Daytona Beach Comic Con. If you are a fan of comic books, if you're a fan of comic book conventions, and if you like meeting comic book creators and getting comics and comic-related stuff, then you need to make your plans to attend Daytona Beach Comic Con. This year's show is September 9th and 10th. Silverline will be there, so you should make your plans to be there too. We'll see you there. If you like comics and find yourself in the Orlando, Florida area, doesn't everyone come to Orlando at some point in time to see the House of Mouse? But when you're here, you need to make it a point to visit Coliseum of Comics, especially the one on East Colonial Drive. They carry Silverline Comics, even a limited edition Coliseum of Comics version of our comics. So, when you go, be sure to ask for Silverline Comics and tell them we sent you. OCD stands for Orlando Collector Deviants. OCD, Steve and Trish, they're a family of geeks who promote geek things, particularly those around the Orlando, Florida area. They're big supporters of Silverline, and we think you should be supporters of theirs too. Go give them some love. If you are an independent comic book maker and you need to get your independent comics made, you need to look no further than Kablam Digital Printing. They print our books, and they do a bang-up job. They're not only trusted by Silverline, but many, many independent comic book makers. Head on over to kablam.com and see for yourself just how easy it is to have your comic printed by them. And tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
Hi, I'm Barb Kilber, co-host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham. Join us each Wednesday night as we discuss comics, literature, movies, and anything else that may catch our attention.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
Hello, Internet, and welcome to That Silverline Show on Tuesday. I'm your host, Tim TK, and I'm joined as always by David Rios.
Hello.
And tonight we're talking about literature as comics, or comics as literature. Talking about more of the literary style stories that will get told through the medium. It's not all just capes. And of course, we'll probably get into a discussion of my personal opinion that you can still tell a literary style story with a cape character. But we'll probably, for the most part, keep it around what your English teacher describes as literature as opposed to genre. But before we get into that, we do have some housekeeping. We are currently running our our funding round for Silverline Team number 2. You can head over to fundmycomic.com, look up Silverline Comics or Silverline Team Up, and you'll be able to find us there. We are currently 85% raised in 9 days. 9 days left to go. Or 85% raised in 9 days, 20 days to go. So we are just at the final stretch here. But plenty of time to go to hit our extended goals. We do have a commercial, so we'll let that play here real quick. All right, so this is our ongoing with several variant covers and original art still available. If you wish to back on a higher level, you can get unique commissions, interior pages. Some have already sold out, but others are still available. And make sure to get some work by our resident Brett Peter Clinton before the 4th of July, because after that he's no longer allowed to work. Yes. As I said, these are all already completed comics. Oh, thanks, Bob. Well, we'll do that next week. We mostly deal with audio listeners anyway, so I'm sure all they heard was just music without anything. Speaking of which, if you're an audio listener and you listen to us on any podcast service after the fact, head on over to Silverline Comics YouTube or Twitch channel. Follow us, get notified when you go live, and you can be part of the chat like Pops Van Zant is right now. So like I said, these are already complete comics. You're not funding a pipe dream. You are just placing a pre-purchase order before it goes to print, essentially. This funding like this just allows us to do it a little more smoothly. So there is that. And we'll get into tonight's topic. Cassisi Harris and Jose Fuentes are both unable to join us tonight, so we wish them the best, and hopefully they'll be back with us next week. But so David and I will keep it strong. And we might get joined by another member of the Silverline family. We'll see if anyone wants to pop on. Okay, so tonight's topic, I guess getting lost in the sauce here, breaking decorum. David, our icebreaker, since last Tuesday, what have you played, read, watched, listened to? What media have you taken in?
Let's see. The following the X-Men 97 stuff. Been reading some of the Fall of X stuff. Just a few things here and there, mostly work. No games, nothing really exciting. So
that is fair.
Kind of boring.
I mean, X97 has been really good. It's almost a shame that it is such a limited series, but expensive show to produce. But I like it a lot. Myself, I've been watching. I'm still in the process of my Bleach rewatch. I'm further into the last Arrancar Battle of Carcroton arc, so I'm almost all the way through the base series again before I get into Leslie and Blood War. But other than that, I've been watching another anime called Hell's Paradise, which is a newer one that only has one season out. The English voice cast is fantastic for it, but the premise is that it's a group of criminals who have been captured by the shogunate and are told that they're going to get sent to this mystical island to retrieve the elixir of life. And if they do so and bring it back, they get a full pardon. However, when they get there, they realize that it's more like hell than it is anything else. So, so it's a lot of superpowered criminals fighting hellish monsters in a really surreal, almost like it takes a lot of like Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism things, and they like intentionally pastiche it together in like this weird mix of different world religions. This is like a lot of mixed iconography. It's really interesting how they pull that off. But it's very violent. It's very good. The storytelling and pacing is fantastic. But, yeah, enjoying that. Reading wise, doing more D&D reading because I'm a giant nerd. This week is the setting book for Eberron. For 5th edition. No one's played in the Eberron campaign setting. It essentially is a little more dark than Lost Realms Faerun. There was 100 years of war that ended only about 2 to 4 years ago. and the 5 nations of the continent of Corvair are now kind of in this magical fueled Cold War. But every nation has super advanced magic technology because they're all in this arms race for 100 years. So it's a high magical, high espionage world where there's a lot of political tension, but also because of that, they've done a lot of damage to the planet just in terms of like war, magic use, things like that. So there's a lot of like creepy crawly monsters and crap sneaking in as well. So very interesting setting.
Speaking about monsters and crap and stuff, did you? I don't know if you noticed, but they did Lego did an announcement for a new Lord of the Rings set.
Oh yes,
The Badur.
yeah,
That beautiful looking set. It has, a Sauron figure. It's got decent amount of figures, but the eye and the tower, it's just beautiful. It's like 4,500 pieces. It's
yeah.
It's just a really nice set.
5,471 pieces, 3 feet tall, $460.
Yep.
Yeah.
But just some really cool stuff. I mean, they've we haven't really seen seen a lot from Lord of the Rings lately. They did, I feel they knocked it out of the park when they did the Rivendell set, and then they followed up with this one. Very, very nice.
Cheers too, yeah.
Yeah, I think, if you have the older stuff, I don't have any of it, but if you did have anything, it would pair really well with the Tower of Orthanc.
Yeah, definitely.
So some cool, very cool stuff.
Definitely.
So, and there's also, I guess, there's a gift with purchase for the first few days.
Okay.
That comes with it as well. It's the flying, is it full? Never say it right. Basically, dragon, undead dragon.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, kind of saw that today. It was pretty exciting.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a hobbyist, that looks like that'll keep you busy for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we know that, we are both hobbyists. You with your, like your Warhammer and a lot of your painted, your miniatures and detail that you put into that and all that stuff. So very cool.
Oh, actually, I do have something. I'm going to have to run to the other room real quick. We'll grab it if we're going to show and tell.
I think I opened a can of worms here. He shared some stuff with us, off screen and all that. He's done some really awesome work, with some painting of these and that. So, it's going to be very good to see, what you're going to do with this set you're showing us.
Yes. So it's not real great, but I did manage to pick up the Banshee Gundam from Unicorn while I was at the Japanese market the other day. Yeah.
You switched gears on me. I thought you were...
if it's just like another Warhammer thing, I may not have ran up to grab it, but since we are both into Gunpla, I figured.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. So awesome. You're gonna have lots of fun with that. You're gonna custom paint and add additional detail and stuff to it, or
I don't know how much I'll do for custom paint. I might look into doing some LEDs or fluorescents to make it look like the destroy mode where it has the sparking stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe actually get some red like fiber wire or something and do the crackling around the Gauss rifle or something.
Okay, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So,
I've nerded out for a little bit today. So the top of the show tonight's topic is about literary storytelling through comics. So I guess we'll set the stage here by talking about the difference between literature and genre. For those of you who have not gone through the dredges of a writing program where they make you write stuff that is literature. But in the creative writing world, there is a kind of fine line distinction. Well, there's a broad line distinction between what's considered genre and literature. Genre work is anything that is fantasy, science fiction, or a combination thereof, or gets too lost exploring non-real settings. So superheroes kind of being a mix of both are definitely fall under the genre section, but the way that a lot of instructors say it is no wizards, no robots, no lasers, things like that. The flip side of that is literature storytelling, which is your Emily Dickinson, your Pride and Prejudice, Grapes of Wrath, Ernest Hemingway, things that are like good pieces of work, but are more focused on themes and emotional storytelling set in the rural world or with more grounded individuals.
reminds me a lot of the older lines, the Comics Illustrated lines.
Yeah, definitely.
They had a lot of the the literary stuff in there.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll probably get into that as well. To kind of combat that from the go, before we get too deep into it, we're going to talk about maybe focusing more on storytelling without your traditional Cape characters, because in my opinion, that you can still tell literary stories in a fantasy or science fiction setting, or even with a Cape character. I think the main thing that makes a story like a truly literary experience is if it does do almost like a study of human emotion and response. Thinking about like Johnny Got His Gun or The Old Man in the Sea, things like that, where it's just taking a lot of time to explore a person's emotions in a setting as they're responding to a situation around them and developing some form of internal change. That internal change is the highlighted focus of the story. I do believe that things like, and we'll mention this as we go on, to pull on our previous example, Lord of the Rings, I believe is there are elements of it that fall under like a high level literature. Oddly enough, the stuff with Frodo and Sam, maybe not so much. Sam more so, but with Strider becoming Aragorn, becoming Elisar, that arc of Aragorn learning to believe in himself and his right to rule, I believe, falls in lines with the literary experience. It is all about his internal change as he explores his emotions and reacts to the influence of the world around him. We'll talk about in comics Saga, and there's is it called Dot Me, something like that, where the story like is or Dot Self, where it is entirely focused on a character's emotional growth and change. Things like that. Even going so far as to say Cape can be literature, I'd say Matt Fraction's Hawkeye is a good literary story. So things like that, I think, kind of debunk the idea that literature and genre can't coexist or aren't the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of being kind of high level talking from being an MFA writer. Like my head is 5 levels deep up my own butt. But David, as someone who's more on the art side of comics, working in coloring and that type of things for so long. But also someone who engages with media and reads. What has been, on the consumer side of things, what has been your thoughts on the distinction between, literary stories and genre? Is there much distinction at all for you, or is it just kind of something you think about in passing?
There actually is, quite a bit. But I do realize, like you said, there's a lot of that crossover. A great example of that is like the Abraham Vampire Hunter and stuff like that, where it takes certain real events and then throws in the superhero or the tip the don't want to say capes, but essentially
Right.
he is kind of running around like that.
Yeah.
But then I also look at stuff that I find kind of real interesting. Like, one of the things for me was the announcement casting for the new Beowulf movie.
Yeah.
With Jeff Bridges, Bryan Cranston, Dave Bautista. So I think there's some really cool things on there. So you're not talking your typical superhero or that type of thing, but you're sorry. That one's something fell over. Sorry. But it's something that is very has a lot of those elements, but it's very literary and stuff. So I'm looking forward to stuff like that. But that to me was kind of a good example of, we've seen it in the past. I know that they've remade Beowulf before, and I also, I'm kind of pulling into that superhero type that also is kind of the basis for Matt Wagner's Grendel, the characters.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They took him in a whole different direction, but there was kind of that idea of that base that they started with and all that. So
yeah, and I'd say like Beowulf is actually just such a great example, because not only is it like a piece of like classic world mythology, but it's something that rides the line of like people consider great literature, or also it's kind of like one of the earliest pieces of genre storytelling coming from Europe, being an epic about Beowulf fighting Grendel in this continent-spanning adventure, essentially. But the way that has kind of set the ground for both more literary like retellings, where they try to retell Beowulf through it's kind of the idea of like dudes doing their own thing, and maybe they use a metaphor or an analog for Grendel, but then also the amount of times that it is actually fantastically retold. I saw that news and I just got very excited for the movie because I'm a huge Jeff Bridges fan. But I think it's such a great example. As we kind of said here is that what kind of serves as a distinction for literature is that it is this high focus on narrative. And I think this is a point where we could make some distinctions. I think some different Marvel properties would not, at this point, some properties by any publisher may not fall into the necessarily like a high narrative focus, especially Marvel, because of the way that for so long they were told with a art first kind of creation pattern, and that you'd have Stan Lee write out so many paragraphs of like telling Jack Kirby like Spider-Man does this, this, and this. Spider-Man does this, this, and this, and then afterwards, they kind of put the storyline on afterwards. But then later you get onto something like the death of Gwen Stacy, and it is this very highly emotionally charged narrative experience where it is focusing a lot on the storyline and the story and the arching, point of Spider-Man doing that. And thank you for the DM, Dawn. We do have multiple people in our organization, so we'll be the ones seeing it, but I'm sure our social media manager will see your DM when they check in. But again, I'll take this moment to say that if you're listening to us After Effect on Google Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, and you do want to be part of a conversation like Dawn is right now, on number 2 YouTube or Twitch, follow us and get notified every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Pacific time. So,
well, let's kind of segue into something else. Kind of going away from the more traditional. I mean, you have a personal experience in that. Is you're a wolf hunter.
You're a wolf hunter, yeah. Well, I was going to say is but you can still see how taking the way that you will then construct the same idea of art and panels in a way that is narrative first does create a more literary experience. And I mean, I was essentially, well, speaking of a piece of literature, Murder on the Orient Express. It's murder mysteries kind of falls in this weird thing of like, is it literature, is it genre? No one really knows, as long as it's not noir or Pulp Fiction. But I wanted to essentially take ideas from Murder on the Orient Express, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and real events from World War II, and then dramatize it in a way that was entertaining. So for me, the way that the story like that becomes entertaining is if you make it more psychological and then ground it in an emotional reality, and that emotional reality happened to be a traumatic injury-induced PTSD. But I mean, everyone has had some. Well, if you want to get psychological about it, everyone has some sort of trauma. It's whether or not they've come to terms with it. But a lot of people have experienced a moment where they have had a life-altering trauma where they recalculate most things about their life. Like, is this really, is this the path I'm doing? Is this worth it? This could be like a physical injury. It could be an emotional injury brought on by a relationship or even like work. I'm sure like a lot of bikers experience this when they have like a major crash and they look at their bike on the side of the highway like, am I going to get back on that?
Yeah, that's definitely that's definitely a concern. I mean, but I'll tell you that probably in the case of bikers, that probably 95% of them can't wait to get back on.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, the fear is overruled by what drove them in the first place to be a biker. To do this. So.
And that's definitely like an emotional reality that is worth exploring and capturing through as a story. So, kind of similarly, James Willard has a moment where he's looking at what his options are now, knowing realistically how much time his rehabilitation is going to take, and if he's really ready for that, or if his overwhelming drive for his goal, what he wants to do, is going to catapult him into this new role he's taking on in counterintelligence, and allow him to make that choice and create a new emotional outcome for himself. And while exploring emotions and mind states and personal growth and choices sounds like it is a very wordy thing, which it can be. I do like a good monologue. It is something you can do really well also through visuals. Comics wise with Wolf Hunter do a lot of like color punches or line weight differences, things like that, to kind of draw on where emotions are changing or how he feels about certain things, stuff like that. On a movie side of things, you can think about things like Memento or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where they'll have a lot of moments that are told entirely visually. So they kind of talk about this. I want to grab your thought as being on the visual side of the team. What are your thoughts on using these visuals to explore the emotions of a scene or change or personal changes in a scene?
Oh, definitely. I think that's a huge impact. When you think of some of these scenes that just show somebody that's anime uses it a lot. The exaggeration when somebody's having a fit. And you just see the yelling, the screaming, and so you have a lot of that visual element that's being pulled in there, exaggerated. When you're dealing with things like, if characters are dealing with like mental illness, you see a lot of the deformed, a lot of thick, jagged, deformed, images. You're not clear. You have a lot of switching between emotions of almost crying to flipping to an angry teeth baring image. So I see that going through and designing a lot of the artwork for it will definitely help punctuate those feelings and bring that across, and it could be huge. And also, like in some of the things, like some of the dream sequences and things like that, you see a lot of like cloudy mist, stuff like that helps bring the air of mystery, or it could be the dark cloud with the glowing red eyes that helps relay the idea of evil and things like that. So definitely can make a huge impact on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And I think also especially with comics, I feel like that visual language you're kind of talking about really enhances the reader's ability to understand exactly what is happening at that moment as well. And that's a tool we get specifically in comics. Like if you're, doing classic literature, like Hemingway had to write out the moments as he's happening. He could use, visuals, but it's still visuals that he had to write out, and then hope that you would image, receive that or image that in a way that got the same effect. Whereas in comics, if there's good communication on the team on, this is the effect we're going for, then you get the emotional impact from that scene kind of like one to one all the way through, touched on by every member of the team, thinking about like how their emotional impact would be the same thing. To make this something kind of that bridges our careers as color and writer, but also an example from Wolf Hunter issue 1 out now. Buy it. Issue 2 coming later this year, maybe.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. Yeah. Then look up for issue 2. There is a moment in the bed where Willard has a realization of he just had a near-death experience, and he's waking up in a place that feels like his hell. He's in the military hospital, away from the front lines, unable to get in a cockpit, and forced to do rehab. But at the same time, he knows that he's not yet ready to move on, and he is it's the Dante effect. You get stuck in hell, and then you don't want to leave hell because you feel like you've earned it. I was talking more with Martin about it, and we're both fans of Euro comics, and this is something I've talked about before, but someone like, what exactly is happening in this moment, about why it's a silent panel just focusing on his face in the bed. And Martin said, oh yeah, I love that. I'm just going to do a red punch-in, because that's going to be, like, right now, this is Willard seeing red with himself and with the world around him. And so we're going to do a red punch-in as he wakes up. So it's just Willard's face on a bed of red. It's not the actual color of the bed, but that's the color of his emotional state at the moment. And we're able to do a panel with no words. I don't need to tell the audience what's happening right now, because they can see exactly what is happening. And we have that kind of exact emotional presentation all the way down the line.
Yeah, it's like, you picture, that panel that has, may have the main character of the story that's, out in the rain, and they're just on their hands and knees, just sitting there, and you can just feel the sense of, the weight that has on them, that they're even struggling to, they just collapsed, and that's it. And, the ordeal that they're going through, is represented by, that one image. And you don't necessarily, like you said, you don't need to, put words or put things into it. Just, if that is communicated, well by the writer, and the artist picks up that and draws the panel right, and, the inker follows through, and the colorist, you don't want to put happy shiny colors in that, so a lot of the, the drab colors and stuff like that. So as the team goes along, if that's put through all across the board, then that can speak volumes without actually saying anything. So.
Absolutely. I mean, kind of really point on that, like, almost in a weird way, talking about a moment where happy shiny was put on an unhappy shiny moment, but in a way that serves the emotional storytelling really well. What might be like one of the most like absurd examples of genre maybe in comic storytelling is the second Suicide Squad movie. But the ones with like Harley Quinn when she is going on a rampage, but the After Effects department has put in flowers and rainbows and cats and like bubblegum and all stuff. That's a moment where the visuals are in direct contrast to the storytelling, and on purpose, where you are seeing her emotional state while experiencing the narrative reality, and you're able to ground in the fact that it really grounds the idea that her emotional reality is not centered. She is not mentally in the same plane that she is physically.
Mm-hmm.
However, we get to a point where she essentially kills like one of the big bads. After marrying him ish, and in a moment where she has an actually very serious talk to herself, and the room is dark, the colors are muted, the gun in her hand is dark and dirty, and everything lines up with this talk she's having to herself about why she's in the situation that she's in, and like why she doesn't trust herself and why she doesn't trust people anymore. And you have this really like interesting character arc where you do see this emotional development and change through extreme uses and changes in the visual storytelling, as well as what's being written and read by the actress.
Yeah, on that scene, I thought, I kind of, went through and thought, how much of this was, with all of the, flowers and all this stuff, is this her coping mechanism, how she's dealing with it, or, how much is this, the fact that, she is, mentally messed up, and maybe a lot of this, a lot of these, bright, flowers, all this stuff was not so much for her, but was it for the image that she's supposed to, flip that switch? she's obviously mentally distraught from why she had to kill this guy, and and what the bad effects are going to be. But is this just something that she had to flip the switch to bring her to what people expect her to be? So I was kind of mixed on what they were going for on that. But there was a couple of different avenues that this could have gone. So
Absolutely.
in result, we got to the end where she meets up with everybody, but and everything goes back to normal. But it's this kind of weird ride that she takes to get to that point. So
Absolutely. And there's also a lot of good storytelling can also not necessarily have one exact meaning or one exact outcome. It can be perceived in multiple ways or can mean multiple things. There's a if you go through like a high level art literacy class, like you'll end up getting like the phrase that multiple realities can be true, or contrasting realities can be true. The idea that you can have different thoughts in your head at the same time, or you can have different things happen at the same time, different emotions happen, and you can perceive something like multiple different times. Oddly enough, the movie Redline by Takeshi Roike. It's an animated movie that managed to bankrupt a studio. But oddly enough, that movie is one of those things where, like, the more you watch it, the more different realities you can piece out from what's happening on the screen and what people are saying or how the visuals are being presented.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. So we've kind of talked about a lot of the visual narrative and the interpretation of visual narrative and how that works and how the artists can work to make a visual that can be interpreted. So I'll talk about something that is perhaps a little more literary grounded. The idea of symbolism and metaphor. And this is kind of where we get to the idea of, retellings of Beowulf, or, the idea of using something that is not something to mean something. So, right, you can have the penguin is the metaphor for hyper capitalist greed in Batman. That's kind of, it's on the nose, but that is the clearest example in comics.
okay.
The idea of using creating a symbol that stands for something, or using a metaphor to convey deeper meaning or a theme. We talked about the multiple retellings of Beowulf, but we can also talk about something similar, actually, that just came out a couple of years ago, that kind of has similar vibes, which is The Northman, which I don't know if you saw that, David.
No, I haven't.
Okay, but it's a retelling of Hamlet, which is the story that Hamlet was a retelling of.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there's like this weird meta narrative about whether or not Hamlet actually was a story that existed in the first place, or whether or not it was Hamlet and Shakespeare created this fake story that he said he based it off of. And then did the director of The Northman also then like create a further like fake thing to say that like, no, it's based on something older, even though it's like an original idea. Yeah.
So are we talking about something that's similar to the Magnificent Seven and the Seven Samurai?
Yeah. The idea that like, yeah, you're taking something and you're retelling these themes or these ideas by using things that are not examples, but they are symbols of them. Yeah. The idea of, you could also look at Star Wars and 37 Ronin and see like where things are pulled from.
Well, it's like, when I think of that, I think of the bouncing back and forth, because it was originally in the 50s, the Seven Samurai, and then it's like all of a sudden, okay, they turn it around and then they made it into Western.
Yeah.
And then they remade it into Western, and then they made an anime based off of it. But the anime returned back to the samurai. So,
Yeah. And then kind of the like really drill on that, like the idea is that the 7 individuals all represented like a core theme or core emotion, and so like the idea is like as you continue to adapt it, you're just pulling that same core emotion or core theme and then putting it in a different type of character. One of my favorite retellings of that is 7 Psychopaths. Which
why does that not surprise me?
Yeah, this guy of Martin McDonough just kind of took the idea, flipped it on its head, and said, "All right, what if we just like inverse, where all these people are not 7 virtues, but they're in fact 7 sins?" And kind of do like a weird flip of that, but even was it 7 deadly sins in a weird way, kind of does the same idea where instead of again characters being the 7 virtues, they are this like they're 7 deadly sins from the Bible, so they kind of take that same idea, change it, and flip it. But to get to the core idea is that expressing themes through characters or through actions or through visuals, we can talk about the amount of metaphor and symbolism in Sandman. Everything stands for something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The the gas mask, the hourglass, the orb, all these different things were on their nose. They don't tell you what they are. They don't they just say that these are his 3 artifacts. He needs them. But if you really take time to think about it and get down on it, you can see like that, the idea of pestilence and age and the unknown and all these other things that have to relate to death are all like items that death needs to work in. Like death works through time, he works through disease, he works through fear of the unknown, all this stuff. But they don't tell you that. They just kind of show you items that visually relate to those ideas. I'm just thinking about Sandman, and I kind of want to rewatch it. Yeah. The comics get more and more into this because Neil Gaiman is someone who I aspire to be, but if I can like get to like 1/10 of his level, I'd be set with life. But same with like American Gods. I'm just gonna go off Neil Gaiman properties now. American Gods is very much on the nose of. They explain things later, and it's a really weird study in American Gods. It is a study in the unraveling of symbolism, the idea that metaphors are pulled apart by human interpretation. So as the story goes on, they start pulling apart the metaphors and pulling apart the symbolism to like make things more obvious. But on its nose, you're just left with lightning storms and hammers and phones and all these other things, and that relate to different characters and different themes and all this different stuff. But I'm getting lost in the sauce. So those are kind of like ideas of visual cues for symbolism and character choices for metaphor and things like that. But also, if you want to get into it, you already kind of mentioned this before, but color palette also plays a big part of this. And that like there is a whole psychology in what colors relate to what. Purple is a color of royalty, and then like yellow is a color of anxiety, things like that. So I'm not sure how much thought you put into like symbolism or metaphor when you're coloring a panel, but like I'm sure like you've probably had stuff that comes through where you've thought about, or the writer has put in a note saying like I want this color because it means this, or maybe you thought that like this character is really heavily tied to this idea, so maybe they should have a color that relates to this idea.
Not particularly tying, like an individual color. I may run into things like, palette of colors. So maybe something more earth-based or something like that. Depending on what the feel of the book is and what they're dealing with. Things more muted colors, more vibrant colors, stuff like that. That does go into the thought definitely, but I don't think I've ever been in a situation, though I have seen it before, where you would have, or I would dictate that a particular color would be. So, an example may be, think of like a DC comic, for example, and you have, Batman's rogues, his rogue villains. You may associate, when you're dealing with, the panels that are relating to the Joker, you may, heavily throw in a purple in there, and then you switch to Killer Croc, and you may, or Riddler, and you put, heavy greens, and as you're basically going through, you could, as you're having these conversations with these, maybe it could be, villains inside of Arkham, for example, and they're talking through the walls, and you may not even have to say, draw the Joker in here, but you may be looking at a cell that has a very purple hue to it or a purple backlight to it, so that that's Joker, and then you may have a green and know that okay, that's Riddler, and you may have something that's like a pinkish red, and you may say, okay, well that may be Two-Face, so you can assign a lot of things on that and use colors to represent, without even having to actually go through and put the character in. But I haven't had a particular cases where I've had to, basically like assign a color mood or color background type thing for a particular type of character. But I can see those type of instances that you could.
Yeah. Kind of also getting back to metaphor. A lot of the times the metaphor can be told through inaction. The idea of like an outstretched hand is a moment where a character forgives someone, kind of idea where like you're showing something happen, using the visual to convey the emotional change, or saying like, that character overcoming something is standing for like this social force, overcoming this social force. Kind of what comes to mind, simply because I am an X-Men nerd, is when Magneto became, I believe it was Joseph. But the amount of times where he chose himself to be floating where everyone else was not, the amount of times that he kind of always presented himself on the high ground.
Because he was always seeing, particularly above humans, he was always seeing, I'm a mutant, I'm always above you. So he did spend a lot of time, but even that carried across to, a lot of the mutants too. When he was always, his pitching of, come to, asteroid M, he's up in the air, and you've got things like the acolytes that are all boosting him, and so I kind of you see the acolytes, and I almost think of Ebony Maw, talking about the exalted Thanos. So you kind of got the acolytes doing the same thing and feeding Magneto's sense of, godhood, that he has. He's the Messiah, and that the carrying a cross. Okay, Quicksilver. He's the son of the Messiah, and all this stuff. So from like you're talking about with the metaphors, I think that's a lot of why you saw a lot of the things where he was, up in the air, and floating there and controlling things, because he was always wanted to show that Messiah complex of, I'm higher than everybody else.
Exactly that. And when he was Joseph, his kind of idea where he was always like reaching us down to grab to shake Wolverine or take off his hand or like do some other stuff, and kind of got to the idea of in Magneto's mind, it was very much a no, don't worry about it, I forgive you type situation. When everyone else is like, what are you doing, man? Like, and then when you get to the actual, I mean, we can talk about like exactly like the Messiah complex idea, and then you have Exodus at this time, who is an acolyte, and then decides to like, no, I'm going to grab my own people, we're going to become the Exodites reality. The idea of the name Exodus itself being the guy is like, we're leaving the Pharaoh, we don't suffer false gods, we're going to chill on our own.
And then you've got the opportunist, the Fabian Cortez, mixed in with that as well.
Yes.
He's feeding Magneto, but at the same time, he's sucking the life out of him and all this stuff, because he's trying to play off of him, but pull all, the resources that he can. So, there's an interesting dynamic as things go along with that. So,
and you see like Cortez is often portrayed as this kind of thin and like, well, depending on the artist, either hunched or overly posh character. The idea like it is this depending on how you either a leech or like a taxer. The idea of like, if he is like thin and hunched over, he lives a little more leech like. If he's like looking a little too posh, like he is an X-Force, then he like, oh, he's just the taxman. He's just there to grab money from you and go. Or grab power from you and go. But then you get to things like Magneto and the X-Men and House of X and some other things where it appears that Magneto has actually made especially after Axis, moments where Magneto has like seemed to make a genuine choice to be more of a an actual leader as opposed to just a hierarch. And the idea that like you see Magneto actually walking in most of his panels. That also, every time that he works with X-Men, he just gets incredibly more jacked each time, and I'm not sure why that was the choice that was made, but I'm here for it. But the moments where Magneto decides to kind of walk at the head of the group as opposed to floating above them, and you kind of notice where you can tell where Magneto's personality is and how committed he is to the people he's with based on his actual elevation in relation to the ground.
Yeah, that's why in a lot of the the Fall of X or House of X stuff, you see a lot of him. You're not used to him being part of the team.
Yeah.
In the history, he was always the Jack Kirby and he and Stan Lee. They made him higher than an unstoppable force, who, by the way, was always stopped. But he was always like, he was annoying, he was arrogant, he was all this stuff. But you look at some of the other books that were that you're talking about, it's like at this time he still maintains that sense of arrogance, but now he's focused and he's working with a team on this. So he has a goal for the team, the entire mutant, mutant race and everything. So, that I thought was interesting. But then, you do have shifts back where he's willing to try something, but as soon as it doesn't work out, he kind of returns back to, his core,
Yeah.
So.
Okay. In the kind of last little point we're going to hit here, after our last 30 minutes or so, we kind of mentioned that literary storytelling, what sets literary storytelling apart is the fact that it is a focus on an emotion or personal change or some sort of emotional change. It's a lot more psychological than good guy beat up bad guy. You're exploring the emotions of each character and how they're developing or changing. And taking time to do it in a way that allows that to breathe in a narrative sense. And I kind of mentioned earlier about how you'll have emotional realities that are worth exploring, and kind of the idea of like exploring different voices through this type of storytelling where you're allowing different people's experiences or emotional realities to be captured in a story that other people can then experience. This is going to get real deep for a second here, but thinking about this, a really good example of a narrative comic is Mouse, which is a retelling of, it's split perspective, but it deals with the ramifications of the Holocaust, and then as a family, how do you then cope with that after you have, come to America and have lived with the idea of this having been, part of your family's history. And it deals with the father's experience living through the Holocaust and living in Poland and Germany during this time, being sent to a concentration camp, and then eventually being liberated, and then cutting with the son's perspective of knowing that this is who your father is now. This is like the emotional toil that this has on him and your mother, and what that means for you and your family and your kids that you're having, and in a way that you're expressing all these emotions and these personal changes that that other people may not have experienced personally, but then can experience through your storytelling. That's probably the darkest way I could, then an example I could give there, but I think it's one of the most clear examples. There's a reason why that's taught in a lot of literary courses, because it is just such a good example of capturing a voice in a comic and then telling a story through that. But also, the characters are portrayed as cartoon mice, which is, ties into more of the symbolism there. When you get to, the other example I had for this was the fact that there's a comic that tells the story of John Brown, which is a similar idea. But which may not be necessarily that some people think about the idea of comics, the same medium that we have Spider-Man and Superman in, but it can also be used to tell experiences from voices like that, like in Mouse, that exist in the same universe. There's a strong contrast there. But I just kind of want to grab then your thoughts on that, David, if you had any experience reading anything like that, or your thoughts on how the platform can be used to grab the experience from different voices, different experiences, and portray it for readers.
Things that are coming to mind for me are actually more movie or anime type things. When you were talking about Mouse, reminded me a lot of Grave of the Fireflies. And watching a lot of the symbolism there, and the things that the characters are going through, and the horrific stuff that's happening. And then another thing that went through my mind, actually towards the end of what you were just saying, was another movie, Hacksaw Ridge. And the way of telling through his perspective. I mean, he was literally a hero. He wasn't a superhero or anything.
Yeah.
But he was a hero, and it was always the case, where, he's just thinking, obviously, if I can save one more, then I can save one more. Okay, I saved one more. Can I save another one? And all that stuff. So I think a lot of that was, a lot of that storytelling, can be done through comics and stories like that, where, exactly based on, of the topic we're talking about, not necessarily somebody who's a superhero. It's just somebody who is a normal person that does heroic things. And, with him, it's like, he knew that at any point he could die. If they found him, he was going to die. But it was always, let me go through, get one more. So I think, there's a lot of room for stories like that. It was just, for me, that this was a true story. This was, based off of fact. So I think that, for me, that literary thing was, very well driven home based off of that movie. And so I think, like I said, I think there's a lot of potential for bringing in stories like that and communicating stories of heroes, but not necessarily superheroes.
Yeah.
And, overcoming things. But also the other take from that movie was, he had defined with himself a boundary, and his boundary was no guns. He wasn't going to shoot anybody. He didn't want to carry a weapon or anything, so he stuck to that. So I think there's some good potential out there for stories, literary stories based off of things like that.
Definitely. Okay. Well, this has been us talking about literary comics. We are still running our Kickstarter, or it's going to take a while to get used to that. Our Fund My Comic. Yeah. Head on over to fundmycomic.com, look up some of my comics, go ahead and get yourself a pre-order. It's going on for 20 more days. If you are listening to us on any podcast service around the world and want to join the conversation live like others have today, head on over to our Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. Follow us there and get notified when we go live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Pacific time and join in the conversation. Next week, we are going to be back talking about slice of life comics. So similarly, kind of not touching on a campus for a little while now, but talking about more so comics and possibly manga that deal more so with just daily life, not necessarily big over the top things or like heavy emotional themes, but things more like the lines of High School Rumble, a few other things like that.
Your Archie and Jughead. Your
Jughead, yeah. For a couple issues there, the Visions was interesting. So I'll be talking about stuff like that. make sure to check out Wednesday Wham and Silver Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on those specific days. But until next time,
Gotta get my thing here.
there you go. Yeah. Make mine Silverline.
Make mine Silverline.
Hi, I'm Chris Ulm. I'm the former editor-in-chief of Malibu Comics. Make mine Silverline.